This is your host James, and got a returning guest today. Really delighted to have Scott Crichton back. He's an engineer, extensively travelled, and this has allowed him to explore many of the world's ancient sacred sites. He's the host of the Alternative Egyptology Forum on AboveTopSecret.com. He's the co-author of the Giza Prophecy, and he lives in Glasgow, Scotland. Sunny Glasgow, as we said last time, and I've got a fascinating book to talk about today, The Secret Chamber of Osiris, The Lost Knowledge of the 16 Pyramids. Fascinating book. Also has a foreword by Rand Flemath, who was on last week, and Rand does a wonderful introduction into the book as well. Let me just tell you a bit of the book. After 200 years of pyramids as tomb theory, a growing body of evidence suggests that the first 16 pyramids of ancient Egypt were not only royal tombs, but nearly indestructible recovery vaults, designed to revive civilization after an anticipated major catastrophe, the Deluge of Thoth. Scott examines the prophecy of catastrophe and the ancient Egyptians' massive undertaking to ensure the survival of their civilization. He also explains how the pyramids acted as easily located storehouses for seeds, tools, and civilizing knowledge. And they would be able to visible to house the precious treasures necessary to restore the rich culture of ancient Egypt. For this, the ancients created a secret chamber whose existence was hidden in myth and whose location was encoded in the Giza pyramids. So without further ado, let's bring on today's guest. Hi Scott, welcome to Capricorn Radio.
Hello James, it's good to be here again.
Oh, back again Scott, I got you again for sure. Really looking forward to today's show, Scott. What a wonderful book, The Secret Chamber of Osiris. I guess the big one, to break down the title for people, Secret Chambers and Osiris. Let's tell people, first of all, Scott, a little bit about you, and then maybe just tell us a little bit about Osiris and why the book.
Right, okay. A little bit about myself. I'm obviously from Glasgow. I've spent my life working in and around Glasgow. I started off my career. My passion has always been history ever since I was a child, really. Been fascinated, particularly with the cultures of the Near East, particularly, obviously, ancient Egypt. My first job from leaving studies was actually in journalism. I was a junior reporter many lives ago, for one of the local newspapers here in Glasgow. But that was way back in the very early 80s, and there was a lot of trouble and strife in the UK with the Thatcher government coming in, and lots of businesses were going to the wall back then, particularly in the newspaper industry, with new technology basically taking a lot of jobs away. So basically my view back then was, if you can't beat it, join it. So sure. I did a lot of courses in new technology, IT courses, got my HND, did some computer networking courses, been qualified as a computer network engineer for many years now. And that's basically, after that I joined the local economic development agency here in Glasgow, who basically have offices all over the world. And in that job, I was responsible for all the offices overseas, which was really good, because it sent me to far-flung places like Tokyo and Beijing, Taipei, Seoul, basically all over the world, North America, Europe, to see a lot, particularly the Far East, a lot of the ancient sacred sites in the Far East. So it was a great experience. As I said, my job basically allowed me to do that, which was a great privilege. So that's basically myself in a nutshell.
Sure.
Yeah, you asked about Osiris.
Let's get into just a little bit on the background of Osiris for those not familiar, and why the secret chamber of Osiris.
Right. Okay. Well, Osiris was or came to be the most important god in ancient Egyptian religion. ancient Egyptians had many, many gods, but Osiris eventually usurped most of the gods in ancient Egypt to become their most important god. He was a god of rebirth and regeneration. And there's a myth written by Plutarch thousands of years ago about Osiris and his wife Isis, who also happened to be his sister. That's how the ancient Egyptians kind of did things. Mm-hmm. Anyway, in Plutarch's myth of Osiris and Isis, Osiris's brother Seth, or Set, was jealous of Osiris, who was essentially the ruler, and he set a trap, a plan to, take over, or to take Osiris's crown, Osiris's throne, and he basically set a trap for Osiris, and he created a box, and asked everyone to fit into this box to see, who fitted into this box, better than anyone else. So Osiris went into the box, and of course, as soon as he's in the box, his brother Seth, with some accomplices, fastened the box with the lid and secured it, and threw the box into the Nile, where basically Osiris essentially drowned. Mm-hmm. His wife went looking for the body, and eventually the body was found in, I think it was an acacia tree, and hearing this, Seth basically found Osiris and cut his body into 16 pieces. Or some parts of the myth say 14 pieces, some say slightly more, but these are the main sort of figures that the myth tells us: 16 pieces, 14 pieces, or thereabouts, and scattered these pieces of Osiris across the land of Egypt. Now, Isis, his wife, went in search of these pieces of Osiris in order to piece the body back together again. Now, she could find all the parts of the body except one part of the body, which was the phallus of Osiris, and that essentially is the myth of Osiris. Now, I got to thinking, well, what does that actually mean? Because obviously, a lot of the time you hear that, that there's a lot of truth that can, be embedded within mythological legends that come down to us, and that basically was my thinking. Well, what could this actually be? And I started to read. This was a number of years ago. I started to read the pyramid texts. Now, the pyramid texts are the most ancient religious writings that we have in humankind's history. They're our oldest religious texts, and they're ancient Egyptian texts, obviously. These texts were written in a number of pyramids from the 5th dynasty. That's from about 2200 BC, from round about that time. They're found in about 4 or 5 different pyramids from that period onwards, 5th, 6th dynasty. And the pyramid texts are basically essentially the only writing ever found in these 5th, 6th dynasty pyramids. And they're basically, Egyptologists believe they are like spells to assist the king into the afterlife. Now, one of the things the pyramid texts tell us, or one of the things that, there's different texts and, sort of different pyramids. They're not all the same text in each pyramid. Sure. So it's a sort of body of text, if you like, over a number of pyramids. But in one version of these texts, it tells us that the pyramid itself. This is what it says: the pyramid is Osiris. That's what it says. Just simply, the pyramid is Osiris. The construction of the pyramid, the construction is Osiris. And I thought, well, that's how. Well, how could that actually be? How could a pyramid actually be Osiris? So I started reading about obviously I'd read about the myth of Osiris and Isis before, and it just struck me that, well, maybe the first 16 pyramids or the first 16 parts of Osiris from the myth of Osiris actually refers to the first 16 pyramids as being the body of Osiris. Just like the pyramid texts tell us, the pyramid is Osiris, the construction is Osiris. So that's essentially the thrust of the theory, and the missing part of Osiris, which Isis couldn't find, represents not a pyramid as such, but a chamber that's unseen, that's been hidden away, because I take the view that if the pyramid were a recovery system for the country, these first 16 pyramids were built as a recovery system for the kingdom, not a recovery system for the king initially, although that may have developed in much later dynasties. I take the view that the first 16 pyramids were set apart and were built for an entirely different purpose than the pyramids that came afterwards. I think there's about 138 pyramids that have been discovered in Egypt, but I think the first 16 pyramids, that includes the giant pyramids of Giza, of Dashur, of Saqqara and so forth, these pyramids were built for an entirely different purpose, which was, as I said, about the recovery of the kingdom as opposed to the rebirth of the king. It's about the rebirth of the kingdom. That to me was the initial purpose. So this missing part, the first 16, these would be the you know how our own civilization here, James, has built a doomsday vault or a recovery vault, if you in one of the islands in the Arctic Circle.
Norway, Norwegian island. They have a repository.
They built a doomsday or a seed vault there. The Svalbard, I think it's just.
That's right, yeah. It's on its own island. There's a tunnel goes into the island, and it's frozen pretty much. Even if the refrigerators failed, the island's permanently frozen most of the year, so it would still keep the stuff naturally cold.
Talking about the missing part of the body of Osiris, it was in the myth that was cut into 16 pieces, supposedly. And basically, I was making the analogy that we have our own modern version of a seed vault on Svalbard Island in the Arctic Circle, which was opened, I think, in 2008. And basically, that's that our seed vault is basically in anticipation of any global disaster that threatens crop diversity, that threatens the food supply. We will have that seed bank to fall back on to reseed, the agriculture in our world. And I'm basically arguing that the ancient Egyptians saw that something was calamity was going to happen to their civilization, and these stories have been handed down to us in the Arab legends, which talk about the ancient Egyptian king Saurid, who saw that the stars in the heavens had changed, had moved away from their normal course. And he asked his priests, what does this mean? And the priests tell him it means in 300 years' time there will be a great deluge followed by a devastating drought. And King Saurid ordered that his civilization, his country, build pyramids to place within them everything that was of value that would assist in the rebuilding of their civilization. So that's one of the myths that has been passed down to us. And, this is basically what I think the ancient Egyptians did. They built these as storehouses or recovery vaults, not just for seeds like what we have in Svalbard, but, for instruments, for tools, for even possibly even for weapons, for all manner of things that would help them basically reboot or kickstart their civilization after the worst effects of the catastrophe had passed. And so it's one thing you would need to make these storehouses really visible. Yeah?
Yeah, oh, for sure. Really visible, really strong and
strong and powerful, really visible, and from quite a distance away they would need to be really visible. You want these things being found sooner rather than later after any possible catastrophe. So that's what they did. They built them really, really big to make them visible from up to 40, 50 miles away. So they could be seen from quite a distance. They would be recovered and found really, really quickly. Now, that's fine and well for, your standard, essential supplies, seeds and tools and whatnot to replant, to get agriculture kicked off again. That's fine and well for that. But what about, your more precious items, your knowledge, your sacred scrolls, your high wisdom, even your valuable things like gold and other precious artifacts.
Sure.
What do you do with those? You don't put them in with the everyday stuff that you want people to find right away. You don't put that stuff in there, because if people knew that all the precious stuff was in these big structures, then they would get looted. They would get looted before they had any chance to be of any benefit, i.e. as a recovery vault, as a seed vault, people would loot them to get the gold. But if they knew there was no gold in it, it was just seeds, more likely people wouldn't bother about them. It's just seeds. I can nip down the market and get a bag of seeds. That's a lot easier than expending a lot of effort to break into these near impregnable recovery vaults. It just isn't worth the effort for, seeds or some tools. If there's jewels or, gold or precious items in these, then yeah, it might be worth the effort. So I don't think they put any of the precious stuff in these massively visible structures, and I don't think they placed it under the right paw of the Sphinx either, because again, that's way too visible. That's the first place people would look for things like that.
I think that might be a natural cavity. That may be, and I'm not entirely sure, but it may be a natural cavity. I'm not entirely sure about it.
Yeah. Well, until James, we get, the scans that have supposedly been done, GPR, ground penetrating radar, whatever it's been done, of that area, we'll never really know for sure. But, logically, from my perspective, it wouldn't make any sense to put, any sort of, valuable goods like, as I said, gold, treasures, whatever, because people, looking for loot, for precious items, would basically end up, going through the place and trashing it just in their ignorance. They could trash, ancient scrolls that, that have got, high wisdom, how to, reboot your civilization, and that could all get destroyed. What you need is a way to plant that, precious material somewhere that can, be pointed to with the structures that you're already building, but that requires someone with, a sort of higher intellect in a sense to work out the where it is. And that's what why I think that the pyramids themselves are actually used to point to the the final part of Osiris, the part that Isis couldn't find, the hidden part, because that's the part that would really that contains all the information that would need to really, regrow their civilization, to reboot their civilization, to reseed their civilization. That's essentially the phallus. That was the seed, if you like, where they could really get the knowledge and the wherewithal to reboot their civilization. So that's kind of very roughly the theory. The 16 pyramids, the first 16 pyramids were built for an entirely different purpose, as a rebirth of the kingdom, not the king. That would be an idea. The rebirth of the king would be an idea, would become a religious idea that would develop out of the original idea of what these structures were for. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, James, that when you actually look at the evidence, have they ever found a body of any ancient Egyptian king in any of these first 16 pyramids in situ with all his treasures in his sarcophagus? The answer is no, they haven't. They've found fragments of bone here and there, small fragments of bone here and there in these first pyramids. But from what we know, and by all accounts, it's been shown that most of this stuff, and not all of it's been shown to be from later intrusive burials.
Only that, Scott, and I know you would do this in the book, but there's, these Old Kingdom pyramids, let's call them the Old Kingdom, or the very first 16. What seems to me, and this may seem obvious when you speak about it or write about it, however, Egyptologists seem to ignore that there's any grand unified plan, that these positioning of these, it's a pyramid complex. It's not just a couple of random pyramids here and there. It's a pyramid complex. They just ignore all this.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I show in the book, James. I think you've probably seen it if you're been through it. That there's a couple of different sort of unified plans, if you like, going on. There's what they're trying to achieve two things. They're trying to build a recovery system to ensure that their civilization can continue after the worst effects of whatever's coming. But within that recovery system, they've arranged some of those structures in such a way as to create a calendar, a cosmic calendar, if you like, which basically points to when this catastrophe actually happened. And I explain that in the book, and obviously it's fairly controversial, and that the date is like roughly almost 17,000 BC, which basically makes the pyramids 19,000 years old. Now, I don't shy away from that. I mean, that's controversial. I know it's controversial, and it will be ridiculed, and I will be lambasted for it. But I absolutely do not shy away from it one little bit, because I've looked at the structures, I've studied the structures to such an extent where I'm absolutely convinced that Orion's belt has definitely been used as a timing mechanism for this cosmic calendar that they present, and it's presented in a entirely different way to that presented by Robert Bauval in his the Orion Mystery book. I think Robert in that book saw some of the parts, but he missed a couple of the parts, and that's explained in this book. But yeah, there's a wider plan. There's a couple of plans going on. The wider plan is the 16 pyramids. If you actually look at the locations and plot those locations onto like a Google map, for example, and just basically plot the locations of the first 16 pyramids that the ancient Egyptians built, what you find is that, I mean, I don't know, James, if this is just entirely coincidence or if there's actually something to to this. You know, I'm not insisting that this was a deliberate plan, this particular layout. What you find is that the first 16 pyramids create, if you join them with a line,
Sure.
they create a rough or a crude outline matchstick figure of the standard archetype, Osiris figure.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the classic Osiris figure with the three-pronged dative crown and the crook and flail.
Mm-hmm.
So it's there. You can see it. You know, if you just join the dots, it is there. Now, I don't know if the Osiris figurine became like a map, so that people would know where to look, where each of the recovery vaults were in relation to each other, or if this is something that maybe just developed long afterwards, that someone realised where they are and placed the dots on a piece of paper, so to speak, and realised that it created this rough outline of a person. I don't know if this was planned beforehand or if it developed afterwards. We will probably never know that idea. But the fact remains, if you look at the first 16 pyramids
Mm-hmm.
and their locations, and you join the dots, they create a crude outline of the classic Osiris figure with the attif crown, the three-pronged attif crown, and the crook and flail. But as I said, I don't know if that's just some happy coincidence or if there's actually anything in that. But given that, the ancient Egyptians tell us that the pyramid is Osiris, the construction is Osiris, then maybe there is something to it.
I think we should listen to the Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians, and not the Egyptologists. I always believe that. Now, that may seem like a simple thing to do, but Egyptology does not even listen to what the Egyptian texts actually say. I know that on many counts now, Scott.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing as well is, the Egyptologists, their views and things are they're ephemeral. They're constantly changing, and a lot of the times it's kind of difficult to keep up with what the latest view is in a particular aspect of ancient Egyptian study.
Mm.
But yeah, I'm with you, James. I definitely take the view of the Egyptians themselves. They tell us themselves that their culture is tens of thousands of years older than what Egyptologists are prepared to consider.
Mm-hmm.
I think the texts say that when you include like the gods and the demigods and the followers of Horus and the mortal kings and so forth and so on, their culture dates back to something like 40,000 BC. This is the kind of time scale that the ancient Egyptians themselves tell us how old their civilization is. So if I'm saying that, these structures were built by the ancient Egyptians, I'm talking about the very, very ancient Egyptians, not
Mm-hmm.
the AEs, but the VAEs, the very ancient Egyptians of 19,000, years ago.
Sure. Scott, I know there's a location given by yourself. Tell us a little bit about the conspiracy around that, if you want to call it a conspiracy, or maybe just blatant control of that location that I believe Zahi Was has put CCTVs in and that.
Yeah, well, this is to do with the hidden part of Osiris, which the myth talks about. One of the very first things that I sort of developed or realised, James, I was curious about, was the what are called the concavities in the Great Pyramid and the smaller pyramid at Giza. Now these are sort of lines or concave faces. The Great Pyramid doesn't have four perfectly flat or smooth faces. The sides of each face of the Great Pyramid are slightly indented towards the centre, which means you have like a centre line running down the side of each face of the Great Pyramid. And you can see it at certain times of the year. You can see it at the equinox,
Oh, yeah,
at the equinoxes, where the sun rising shadows put certain parts of the pyramid in shadow and certain parts in light. So you can actually see this concave effect on the southern face of the Great Pyramid.
There's very few photos of it, Scott, but I believe there's one from a plane.
Yeah, that's right. I think it was a British pilot in the Second World War, P. Groves.
Fascinating shot though, because it really captures the whole equinox.
It does. Yeah, you can see it there in that photo really, really well. But again, James, we don't know why they did this. Egyptologists can't tell us what this was for. I mean, it would have been much simpler just to build a smooth, face. Why did they indent the size of each face?
I know as a mechanical engineer, Scott, and I've done all sorts of engineering, but I know that the scientific know-how to achieve that, not to even conceive it, to achieve it, is incredible. Absolutely. It's unprecedented.
Yeah, I mean, it's mind-boggling. They are going out of their way to make their work so much more difficult. And when there was, there was no real purpose or reason for doing it, or was there? Was there a reason for doing it? Well, I think there was, and I think it's related to the small pyramid because that has the very same features. They're much less visible because it's a smaller structure, but they've been identified in the smallest pyramid. They're entirely missing from the middle pyramid of Khafra at Giza. Really? But the Great Pyramid and the smallest pyramid, G1 and G3 as they're known to Egyptologists, these exhibit these concavities down each side of the pyramid face. There's no make the construction so much more difficult. And I had to ask myself, why would they do that? There has to be a reason. And then I came up with this idea called the centroid theory, where basically, as I'm undoubtedly sure that you'll know, James, that a triangle has many centres.
Oh, yeah.
A triangle has many, many centres. But in the ancient world, a triangle only had, there was three known centres of a triangle, and these were called the circumcenter, the incenter, and the barycenter. Mm-hmm. And that basically is the nub of the centroid theory, because you can actually, using the centroid theory and the three centres of the pyramids, you can reverse engineer the triangle that plotted those 3 points or those three positions where the pyramids are. So that's what I managed to do. I managed to reverse engineer the unique, there's only one triangle that fits it. Yeah. Well, strictly speaking, there's two, because you can have 1 point in south and 1 point in north. But the one that points south is the correct one. And I know this for a number of reasons, which I won't go into today because we would be here for hours and hours. But anyway, there's only one triangle that fits all the criteria, and that's the one that points towards the southwestern desert. Just, outside of the Giza Plateau and on for a couple of kilometres, and it pinpoints this spot in the desert. And I thought, why would it do that? Why would the pyramids at Giza pinpoint this spot using the concavities? Why would it do that? And then I started thinking about the Osiris mystery, the missing part, the body being the 16 parts being the pyramid. Maybe the lost part was, maybe the pyramids were being used to point to this lost part in this part of the desert. So that's what I tried to do, James, in 2008. I went to Egypt. I went to Giza to try and get to that location. Now, that might sound a bit bizarre, but, I was fascinated. I wanted to get there. I had to get there. I didn't know what I was going to find if and when I managed to get to that precise spot. Yeah. I had no idea. But what I did know, that what I had planned to do was had a small granite pyramid made of Scottish granite. Nice. And basically, I had the centroid theory engraved on the underside of this small granite four-sided pyramid of mine. It was very small, it could fit in your hand.
Yeah.
And I took it with me, and I was going to, like the capstone of a pyramid, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sits on the top of a massive triangle, if you like. Well, this small granite pyramid of mine was the capstone that would go at the end of this, what I call the centroid triangle, this triangle that pointed to this spot in the desert. And I was going to basically bury my granite capstone at the end of the apex point of the Great Giza Triangle. That's what I call this centroid triangle, the Great Giza Triangle. So that was my plan. So I tried to get to this point, James, but my goodness, I couldn't get there. There was walls, there was barriers, there's, security towers with, armed guards. There's, I went in through the Giza Plateau, yeah?
Yeah.
Through the tourist entrance, basically.
Sure.
I just basically walked all the way, till I saw Hawasse's wall.
Yeah, the wall, the Great Wall of Hawass. It's incredible, isn't it?
And I'm like, and the apex point I wanted of the Great Giza Triangle was just like, it was in touch. It was about 200 meters away, James, on the other side of this fence.
Yeah. And
this fence went for as far as the eye could see. And honestly, I mean, in parts it was about 13 feet high,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, I was like a bit dubious about do I go over this or do I not? And I had a couple of run-ins earlier with a couple of Egyptian guards.
Sure.
They're basically on camel, and they've got the semi-automatic guns and stuff, and you're like, you're a bit careful, I don't want these guys to find me. So I kind of looked around. There was nowhere. No one to be seen.
I had a run in with the same said people. I had tripods and camera equipment. I was there in February, and I jumped out of the tour bus and I put the tripods on the ground. I thought I had machine guns. They all jumped out of it. They all jumped out and pulled the guns on me, and I'm like, hands up! I'm just a TV guy. Sorry.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I mean, I think there's
yeah.
I mean,
but they're edgy though. They
concerns.
are. I understand those. They're very edgy people though. They are.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm halfway up this fence, so I'm about 5 or 6 feet up this fence, and then I hear this really horrible sound, and I was like, what on earth was that? I didn't like the sound of it one little bit, so it drops to the ground. I looked round, and there's this camel making this god-awful noise, and there's the guard, the antiquities guard, just kind of looking at me. What are you up to, boyo? So that was me, huckled. So I didn't get very far that day. I didn't get over the fence. But the strange thing is, James, it's like this fence stops within 200 yards of the very point I wanted to get to. So I managed to get talking to the guard, and it was quite funny because this is the bit where he was asking where I was from and so forth, and I told him I was from Scotland. Oh, Scotland! Oh, you're Egyptian. I was like, what? And then he went into this story about how he was taught in school, apparently as a lot of Egyptian people are.
I'm glad you mentioned this, Scott. I wanted to get into this. I'm really glad you mentioned this. So.
Yeah, he basically was talking about how ancient Egyptians discovered Ireland and Scotland, and it was a fascinating sort of discussion. And I went back and I looked a bit more into this, and sure enough, there's an Egyptologist, Lorraine Evans, who's written a really excellent book on the subject, which I've read. It's called Kingdom of the Ark, a fascinating book which details the whole history of this Pharaoh's daughter. I think her name was Meritetis, something like that. Although she was also apparently known as Scota.
Queen
And
Scota, yeah.
she was the daughter of the Pharaoh Akhenaten, and who, during the Amarna period, abolished the whole pantheon of ancient Egyptian gods, and there was to be a monotheism of just one god, and that was Atum.
He was a rebel. And, he was quite a rebel in a way, Scott. Persecuted for it.
Very much so, because the Egyptian priesthood were outraged by this. They were up in arms by this. So eventually he was kind of run out of town, so to speak, and his family, his daughters, they all had to flee. And the story goes that Scota fled up across Mediterranean into Greece, married a Greek person called Gallius, something like that. They fled across Europe, the southern Europe, or the northern Mediterranean, and countries across into Spain, from Spain up into Ireland, where they had a pitched battle with the ancient Irish tribes at the time. I think that was the Tuatha De Danann, something like that.
Tuatha De Danann, yeah.
And then Princess Scota was killed at that battle, but her people apparently were successful in the battle and eventually migrated northwards into an area in the northeast of Ireland. I'm talking about ancient Ireland, when it was like Hibernia, and there was a province known in the northeast as Scoti, or the Scoti, and the tribe that lived there moved over into Dalriada, which was in the west coast of Scotland, which is it's called Argyll today.
Sure.
Dalriada, so it's a fascinating account in Evans's book, and here was me having a blether, having been caught with my hand in the cookie jar with this antiquities garb. You are son of Egypt, and you from Scotland. So, but so he basically just gave me a ticking off and says, "Don't do it again," and head back that way, and that was it. So I had some dark thoughts at that moment, James, of an Egyptian jail looming large, and it wasn't a very pleasant.
The next time I get caught rambling around the Giza Plateau, I'm going to say, well, I'm okay. I'm Irish or Scottish. I'll be fine. I'll just say Scota, Queen Scota, and just see what happens. But Scott, this is not just too fanciful. I mean, there's genetic with the haplogroups as well. Maybe explain this as well. I think this is worth mentioning too.
Yeah, well, I briefly touch on that in the book, James. I don't go into a lot because it is highly sort of controversial, and the evidence apparently for that was kind of done from a video grab, I think, from some documentary, some lab, so I think it was a Swiss lab, something like that, did a screen grab of a computer screen that Dr. Hawass was apparently looking at for something else, and they put the profile from this screen grab through some DNA analyzer and come up with this R1 and NB or whatever it is, haplogroup, which is most prevalent in the western fringes of Europe, mainly Ireland and Scotland, parts of Wales. So I don't know the truth of that. Maybe there is something to it, but it's very
not only that though,
intriguing.
Scott, not only that, Scott. I do know that the Irish and the Scottish have the highest proportion of Rhys negative blood group as well. That ties them together. An incredibly rare genetic stock of people, if you want to call that.
Absolutely. And I think the whole Tutankhamun. Having this haplogroup, maybe that lends truth to the story that, Akhenaten's daughter Scota, because I think Tutankhamun was the son of Akhenaten.
Yeah.
And so that would make Scota his sister,
half sister or sister.
So obviously, she would have the same haplogroup as Tutankhamun. So, you could argue, yeah, well, possibly there is something to that particular story. But I think
it's not
one
incredible.
of those things we need more evidence, really.
It's not incredible either. When you think of the coastline of the Mediterranean and northwestern Europe, I mean, we're not talking vast sea distances. We know the megalithic people did it, Scott.
That's right, yeah.
I mean, if anything, I think they maybe had an influence on the megalithic people, or what was left of the megalithic people, if you want to call it that, and then which turned into the Celts. But
yeah, well, yeah. I mean, look at what Lorraine Evans, the Egyptologist, says in her book. She talks about ancient Egyptian, what appear for all intents and purposes to be ancient Egyptian boats. They're definitely not Viking boats. They're called the ferriby boats, found in a place in Yorkshire, and they look very much like Egyptian boats, and they're something like 3,500 years old. Wow. So we know as well that Egyptian necklaces, Phaeon beads have been found, all over, the British Isles. We know that the Scots, the ancient Scots, and I think the ancient Irish as well, mummified their dead. Very few of I think the northern Western European people to do that. You look at the ancient Egyptian word for the capstone that went in the top of the pyramid was the Bennu, or the Ben stone. Yeah. And that's what Scots call the top of their mountains. The peaks of their mountains are bens.
Yeah, that's true.
Ben Nevis, Ben Lomond.
Same as in Ireland, we have Ben Bulben, Ben Brada, Ben, everything's Ben, it's...
Yeah, these could very well be ancient connections back to the roots of the Scots and the Irish. And in the book, the Secret Chamber of Osiris, I've got some material from Muhammad al-Fayyad, who talks about himself being taught as a boy about the roots of, the Scots and the Irish coming from ancient Egypt. And he's actually at the moment designing a monument for Princess Scota he's got a Highland estate here in Scotland.
Oh, that's why he's in Scotland, yeah.
Yeah, called Balnagowan, and he's basically designing a statue of Princess Scota to go on his estate, because he firmly believes that she is the roots of the Scottish and partially the Irish people.
Even the Scottish have a long interest. British do too, Scott, in fairness, but the Scottish have a firm stranglehold on ancient Egypt. They love it. They research it, and you're just another one, Scott, you to confirm. But there's a very deep fascination in the Scottish researchers and scientists and engineers, Scott.
Well, that's it's just, I think, I don't know why that is. I think we just have a lot of long, cold winter nights, James, to do a lot of thinking, about the world and about, it's cold here. What can I do?
Wasn't Thomas Young Scottish? He was Scottish as well.
Who?
Thomas Young, who cracked the hydrogen.
Oh yeah, along with Champollion helped.
Well, I give Thomas Young the credit first and Champollion second. Champollion did the hard work, but I think if it wasn't for the work of Thomas Young, the Scottish...
Yeah, the foundation work, and
he largely gets ignored for that, but it was the key. He was the one who gave people the key,
Yeah. Young had the Rosetta Stone, whereas Champollion only had copies of parts of it, so, and then, there's Graham Hancock, another Scotsman from Edinburgh. His books have totally, changed the narrative, or have totally changed the discussion since the early 1990s about our ancient origins of who we really are, where we really came from. Graham's books have fascinated millions of people all across the world. He's got a new book coming out this year,
Oh,
Magicians of the Gods, which I think is an update to Fingerprints of the Gods. So I think that's one that everybody should, interested in this particular genre, should be looking out for.
The whole genre has really blossomed, Scott, hasn't it? I mean, 20 years ago, there was a handful of people doing this, and now and there's still not enough. Let me just say, there's still not enough people researching topics, alternative history. I mean, we could do with the whole planet doing it, because I think the answers to mankind's future is in our past.
Well, absolutely. You've got to know where you came from to know where you're going. You've got to know your history to, avoid making the same mistakes.
Let's bring that back to the book, Scott, because let's just talk about the cyclical catastrophe or deluge. Do we know what that cyclical deluge is? Is it an earth wobble shift? Is it periodically getting hit with comets, or is it both, or is it?
Well, it's really, really hard to pinpoint that one, James. The ancient Egyptians, they tell us that the heavens, the stars, when I say the ancient Egyptians, I'm talking about their stories that were preserved by, in the Arab legends, of 12, 1400 years ago. But, to be fair to the Arabs, preserving the ancient Egyptian stories, a lot of people, poo-poo, oh, it's an Arab legend, they talk about, magical bending glass and all sorts of other strange things that were found in the pyramid. Yeah, stories become embellished, but I think there's a central truth in a lot of these stories that the Arabs preserved. Now remember, the Arabs preserved for us, for Western society, the works of Plato, the works of Socrates, these great philosophers. These were preserved by the Arabs, and then they came back. Throughout the Arabs preserved these works, when Europe was in the Dark Ages, and then the Arabs brought them back to Europe, and through the Renaissance, So it's the deeds and the acts and the good work of the Arab peoples that preserved all this stuff, that would have otherwise been lost. So for people to have a go that, oh, these are just Arab legends. Well, they preserved the works of Plato and Socrates, and other philosophers, So look at the broader picture here. They could just as well as have preserved the ancient writings of the writings of the ancient Egyptians. Mm-hmm. So I believe they did. When the Arab legends talk about the ancient Egyptian king Saurid talking about building these structures, to preserve everything that the country would need to reboot itself after the deluge had passed, then, well, maybe there's truth in that. Maybe there is truth that they saw the stars move out of their normal course. Because here's the thing, James. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of a guy called George Dodwell. He's an Australian astronomer, and he's passed away now, but he did some incredible research, I think back in the 50s, and he basically looked at all the ancient structures and the alignments of these structures, and they plotted them on a graph. And these basically structures were aligned to the cardinal directions and so forth. And what Dodwell discovered was that around the year 2300 or 2350 BC, mm-hmm. the Earth's
an axial, is this the axial tilt theory?
Yeah, the axial tilt, the axis of the Earth, or the obliquity of the Earth, was at 26 or just over 26 degrees.
Sure.
Now, the thing is, James, our current model, are based on the sort of Newcomb model mm-hmm. of the Earth's, rotational axis, or its swing, its obliquity, ranges from between roughly 22 and 24 degrees. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, Dodwell has shown mathematically that actually, in 2350 BC, the Earth's axis was 26 degrees. How do we explain that? How does modern science explain that. So something happens to the Earth's axial tilt.
Yeah,
something happens to it.
They refer to this as, I remember now, they refer to this as the Dodwell hypothesis. That's the grand title, as they say. But what I like about Dodwell's hypothesis...
Yeah, and it's a fascinating hypothesis, and it's getting even more support nowadays by a couple of other guys, Norwegian, I think, Swedish physicists, and they have shown that the Earth's axial tilt, or the pole, so to speak, not the actual tilt itself, but the pole, the Earth's pole, was roughly in the centre of Greenland about 20,000 years ago.
Wow. I just did a show yesterday on this, would you believe, Scott, that funny enough, because I had a Russian guy who's building pyramids, Valery Uvarov. I don't know if you know Valery Uvarov, but they're going at serious pyramids research now in Russia, and he says the exact same thing, that the pole was in the centre of Greenland. I think a lot of people are looking at this now, a lot.
Yeah. Well, the remarkable thing is, James, in my hypothesis about the Great Pyramid, you know the Great Pyramid's got these shafts, these small sort of shafts that go from the chambers upwards to the outside of the pyramid, 35
centimetres wide, and they go...
Yeah, they're tiny. I mean, they're it's incredible why they would expend so much time and effort to do this. But again, I've come up with a theory. And if you actually look at it, the difference between both sets of shafts is about roughly 6.5 degrees maybe. One set is 45, another set is 39 degrees. Yeah? Inclination. And on the other side, they are 33 degrees and 39 degrees. So again, you've got a 6-degree difference. Now, what that to me is actually showing is that the sky moved 6 degrees. The stars moved 6 degrees in a circular fashion. Yeah? And the thing is, but wait a minute, if the pole at Greenland, the pole was in the centre of Greenland, that's roughly about 17, 18 degrees away from where the pole is today. So why is Giza only saying 6 degree shift if we're actually saying the pole was in the centre of Greenland, which is roughly 17, 18 degree shift? Sure. Well, actually, if you take Google Maps and you plot the point from Giza to the centre of Greenland, and you map that in degrees, you'll find it comes to 54 degrees. If you map Giza from Giza to the pole just now, it comes to 60 degrees, obviously, because Giza's at 30 degrees.
Sure, exactly.
Latitude, yeah. So 60 degrees is, to the pole today, it's 54 degrees from Giza to the centre of Greenland pole. Yeah. That's a difference of 6 degrees. Yeah. So this is the whole point, because of the Earth's tilt. From a person at Giza, the shift in the sky would only register as a 6 degree shift. And that's exactly what these shafts show. They show a 6 degree shift.
You know, Scott, when you talk geometry, you have my attention. I'm an engineer first. Yes, I like geometry. However, the ancient Egyptians, it may seem obvious again to state this, but I have to, for the fact that Egyptology has this stranglehold. But the ancient Egyptians used geometry. They built pyramids. They built angles. They were obsessed with geometry. They were obsessed with the triangle. And when you start talking geometry, you're using their language, Scott. You're using their language to explain this. So I'll listen to you at 100% attention, because this stuff is incredible. Yes. However, it's indicative of something. It's indicative of lost knowledge. It's indicative of, a grand unified plan. It's indicative of what these guys were trying to do, Scott.
Well, that's, that's the first thing you see when you arrive at Giza or at any pyramid. What do you see? Triangles everywhere. You see triangles everywhere. They're speaking in the language of triangles. And as I said, this, the centroid theory, the position of the 3 pyramids at Giza creates a unique triangle which points to this specific spot in the desert. And you know what, James? I tried to get to that spot. I tried going direct from the north through Giza and then up around, going all the way around down to the south and then in from the south upwards, and it was blocked off as well. I couldn't get into that spot, either from the north straight down or from the south straight up. I couldn't get in. Now, I've stood, James, between the paws of the Sphinx, yeah? Now, that's one of the most sacred places in all Egypt. And, they really don't allow very many people to go in there.
That's right, it's all cordoned off now, yeah?
Yeah, it's all cordoned off. So, but I managed to get in, and but I couldn't get into this piece of worthless desert, supposedly worthless desert. So it makes me wonder, well, is there something to that spot? And here's the thing, here's the kicker, James, yeah? After, I couldn't get into the spot, I couldn't place my little apex, my little capstone at that apex point of the Great Giza Triangle, that spot in the desert. I couldn't get there. And I was disappointed because I wanted to recite a few words from the hymn to Osiris, just in homage, I suppose, to what the ancient Egyptians had left, what they'd done and what they'd done for all of humanity, really. So I couldn't do that. I got back to Scotland and I emailed Hawass, I sent Hawass a couple of emails telling them about this and what I'd been doing and asking him why he built this wall. It's called Hawass's Wall, and he replied back, it was a standard reply, to protect the guests of Egypt. That was the standard reply. But a few months afterwards, I looked on Google Maps, and what were they doing? What was happening at that apex spot? It was being dug up.
Wow. That's insane, Scott.
It was being dug up. You want to see it now. There was bulldozers, there was, dumper trucks, all over the place, all over that site. And, right in the heart of it is the apex point, and it's all been dug up. It looks as if it's been covered over with part of it. I don't know what they've done, but it looks like it's been covered over with concrete or something, but there's nothing there. I just don't know why they did it or if there's anything to it. But this happened months after I wrote to Hawass about the theory of the centroid theory, about the apex point, and that's what happened a few months afterwards. You can go on and look at it. Google Earth has this time lapse, which you can go back a few years. Go back to about February or January 2009. I was there in March 2008. I wrote to Hawass about December 2008, and then I think in February 2009 they were starting to dig it up.
That's incredible, Scott. That's incredible. The thing is, I'm not a fan of Hawass, as you probably know anyway, Scott, but I'm definitely sure there's sinister archaeology going on in Egypt.
Well, I mean, my view on Hawass is, I think the guy knows a lot. I think he's got a tough job. I think he could do things a bit better. I think he was very much the guy, or was very much the guy in control. Nobody could really do anything in Egypt unless the proper credentials. To be fair, you can understand why that would be. But there's another aspect of Hawass which I won't dwell on here. But I think he could have helped things along a little bit easier and been a little bit more open in certain circumstances with certain things.
Wow, Scott, it's an awesome book. Give us people, we're at the top of the first hour here. Just tell people where we can get a copy of your book, and give us out your website, Scott.
Well, obviously, if you go to the website, there'll be links there. The website's www.scottcrichton.co.uk. The book is available in all good bookstores, Waterstones, Barnes and Noble, and also available online from the publisher Inner Traditions Bearing Company. It's also available on Amazon and Goodreads and other good online bookstores.
Scott, do you think we're going to maybe see a different type of archaeology in Egypt today with Zahi Hawass gone now? I'm not sure anything's really happening there at the moment. Do you think there's maybe going to be a new paradigm or a new dynamic of ancient Egypt, or do you think the old stagmatic climate's going to stay?
Well, it could go either way. It could actually become even worse, or it could become more open. I know of some Egyptologists, James. I'm not going to name any names. Friends of mine who are Egyptologists. I can't name their names because, they've got livelihoods, and if I named names, their livelihoods would be put in jeopardy, because they've got research grants that they need to get, and if they don't toe the line, it's frowned upon. It really is frowned upon, and they tell me this themselves. This is these Egyptologists telling me this themselves, and these Egyptologists even tell me things like, the cartouche in the Great Pyramid in Campbell's Chamber, it's a fake. We know it's a fake. This is what they tell me. It's one of those
toe the party line type of things, Scott.
Yeah, toe the party line. It's one of these things we know about, but we can't talk about. But everybody inside, or the more sort of forward-thinking Egyptologists know this. So I know, James, what I'm getting at here is I know there are now forward-thinking Egyptologists out there who think there is a different paradigm to explore. And you see, there's two paradigms that have been presented to us in history. That's the paradigm of catastrophe, that's why the pyramids were built, or tombs, that's why the pyramids were built. These are the two paradigms. Now, what I've done with this book is taken the other paradigm, that they were built, as a mechanism, to avert, a catastrophe. That's why they were built. But I'm also saying that latterly, they would have most likely become tombs for kings, because these things would have become sanctified, they would become religious icons, these great pyramids. They would have become the means, to the rebirth. Yeah, because that's what they did for the earth. So eventually they would, these pyramids, this idea would be, become, the means for the king to be reborn. So it was, it was both. This is what I'm saying. These legends that have come down to us that say, yeah, well, they were built for as a recovery system for the flood. They were built as tombs. I'm saying, actually, they're both right, probably. That's what I'm saying. And what I'm hoping is that the more open-minded younger Egyptologists that are around today are maybe more accepting to looking into that possibility, that there might just be more to these Arab legends than we're currently giving them.
Sure. Set the engineers out of the equation, set the Egyptologists out of the equation. You give me anybody in this planet and you show them, or I show them this, eight-sided pyramid, this fracture line that shows the equinox and how it's designed, and I explain to them all the anomalies point by point, and I show them all the details. Regardless of any engineering know-how or any Egyptology preference, they will just tell you, oh, this is incredible. It's sophisticated to a point of like the limits of humanity's abilities. And, there's obviously some sort of major purpose, if not a grand plan at stake here. Give that to anybody. They have a logical mind. They will understand that, Scott. And to extend that to the Egyptologists, I deep down don't think it's just a case of ignorance. I think they know. I think they know this. And like you say, Scott, I don't care. I think ignorance plays a large role, but ignorance cannot, cover this thing up forever.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, there, James. I think there's a lot of kind of deluding themselves in Egyptology. I think there's a lot of burying their heads in the sand and not looking too close at the evidence, because they really don't want to find anything that'll upset the paradigm. They're almost scared in a sense.
They've
to look too
ostracised
close
themselves. They've
at
really
the evidence
ostracized.
to analyse it too deeply.
Yeah, totally. They've just ostracized themselves for the point of career or, to toe the party line. It's sad in a way. It is a little sad in a way, but I'm hopeful for a paradigm change. But like you say, I think you can go either way, Scott.
Yeah. Well, I think, as I said, I hope that the newer, younger Egyptologists have more open minds. I don't think this will happen in my lifetime, but who knows? But at the end of the day, the evidence is mounting, James. The evidence is mounting that these are not tombs. These first 16 pyramids were not tombs for kings. They were not rebirth chambers. The very first pyramid at Saqqara, what did they find in it? They didn't find a body. They found tons and tons of grain. That's what they found in it. They found tens of thousands of storage vessels. Yeah. That's what they found in it. Didn't find a body. Look at the Great Pyramid. What did they find? What did Colonel Howard Weiss find in the relieving chambers above the Great Pyramid when he was opening these chambers in 1837? What was his very first comment? One of his very first comments about what he found in these chambers. Black soot. Yeah. Black soot. In every single one of these chambers, all the way up. 4 chambers he opened, and this black soot was in all of these chambers. What could that black soot be? Well, they haven't really identified it definitively. They think it might be, decayed rock or, insect exuviae or something, but it's so smoothly spread across the floor of all these chambers. It can't be that. It just can't be that. Now, I think I know what it is, and I explain it in the book. It's to do with, if you read Petrie's study of the Great Pyramid, and particularly the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid, all the walls have been the granite walls in this chamber have been slightly blown outwards.
Blackened them, yeah.
There's cracks in the ceiling. There's scorch marks. There's burned scorch marks in this chamber. Now, that sounds to me like there was an explosion of some kind in that pyramid. But what? Now, we're not talking nuclear. We're not talking some, exotic science here. It could be something as simple as a grain dust explosion. If there's a massive amount of grain being handled, and say, for example, the massive grand gallery below the King's Chamber, there's this build-up of grain dust, yeah? And somebody happens to walk by or strikes a copper chisel, and there's a spark, boom. Honestly, James, that's the biggest bomb you can have. A grain dust explosion. They're lethal, absolutely lethal. They can throw, 2-ton, blocks, hundreds of yards.
Yeah, incredible power.
Incredible powerful. And the dust from a grain dust explosion, what does it look like after it settles? Black dust.
Yeah.
And there you have it. That's what they found in all these chambers above. So to me, there was an explosion in that chamber, but to me it was to do with grain
dust.
And that's what that black dust is.
Yeah, that's a common thing. Scott, I want to ask you about the Bent Pyramid. What do you think of the Bent Pyramid?
Oh, there's all sorts of explanations for the Bent Pyramid. I definitely it's one of these things which tells you that the pyramids were a plan. It's one of these things that tells you that
exactly.
it wasn't a mistake, because if it was a mistake, you would strip it down at the point of failure, wouldn't you?
If it is a mistake, it's one of the most meticulous, well planned, highly engineered mistakes on the planet.
Yeah, why would you clad it? all the way
After
to the
making a
top.
mistake.
If it was a mistake, why would you clad it?
I tell you now,
with casing stones all the way to the top. You wouldn't do it. No, what you would do is you would strip it down. You would use it as a quarry to build one and get it right. But no, they didn't do that. They kept on building it. They kept on building, the casing stones all the way to the top, and they built, some ancillary buildings as well. No, that was a mistake. You want to build a perfect true pyramid, which is the Egyptologists' theory.
Sure.
Well, you would strip that down as a quarry, and you would reuse the stone from that. You wouldn't, re-quarry, at great expense, a lot more stone to build the Red Pyramid as a true pyramid. You would use that one there that was your mistake. The Egyptologists say, but, he needed a pyramid, in case he died. You needed one that was already built. Well, I already had one that was already built, the Meidum Pyramid. That was already built.
Yeah. It doesn't make sense.
It just doesn't add up. It just doesn't make sense.
I think it would be more easier, once they wanted to change that angle, it would have been easier just to take that thing down and rebuild it, definitely.
Yeah.
Because to build with two angles is, like you say, it's the same thing as the Great Pyramid with these 8 sides on it. To build anything with just the plain 4 sides is bad enough. But then to do it with changing angles and then encase the whole thing?
Yeah. It's the encasing thing that, is truly, truly bizarre. But one of the other things, James, I think is going on is there's a whole manner of different layers going on here. Different people from different epochs coming along and muddying the water, adding their own little bit. Look at the Pyramid of Meidum. That's near the Fayum in Egypt, quite far south of Dashur. Now, that was apparently the first pyramid that Snefru, who was Khufu's father, that's the first one that he apparently built. Now, apparently it collapsed, or according to Egyptologists, it apparently collapsed shortly after its completion. But the bizarre thing of that pyramid is that it was obviously built by 2 different people. The first people understood good engineering practice, and the people that came along afterwards didn't. Because the people that built the core step Pyramid of Meidum, as you can see it in all the photographs. Now, the step Pyramid of Meidum is actually got casing stones. It's not just core blocks. The step Pyramid of Meidum is actually it's got casing stones, so it was finished. But then Snefru came along, and he wanted to turn it into a true pyramid. So what does he do? He builds the casing. He builds more casing on top of the casing to try and make a true pyramid, which collapsed. Why did it collapse? Because he built it in sand. Yeah. Now, any good engineer knows you don't build something on sand.
Oh, yeah.
But the engineers that built the core of the Meidum Pyramid with its stepped casing stone, they built it in solid rock, bedrock. But Snefru didn't. So that to me, there's a clue. There's a little hint that there's some people out there that knew what they were doing, and there's another bunch of people came along at some later date, were doing stuff, and they just hadn't a clue what they were doing.
Another thing about the bent pyramid, Scott, just as for the viewers or the listeners out there, when you actually walk up to it, the lower casing stones are missing, but most of the casing stones are there on all the 4 sides and the changing angle. But you can actually look inside the casing stones. You can actually get right underneath the edge of the pyramid and get a look in and see how they're matching. But each casing stone is individually matched, Scott, into the structure. I can't believe that. I'm in shock at this thing going, oh my God, until you see it with your own eyes. Yeah,
and they did this all with rock pounders and copper chisels.
And copper chisels.
It simply beggars belief, but that's the theory, that's what we're left with, to accept in the Egyptologists' paradigm. And that's why I say, I just don't think they want to look at it too closely. They don't want to
believe, forgive me for being flippant, but I can't believe that you go back to the time of the first suggestion that the bent pyramid was a mistake. I can't believe there's somebody who didn't turn around and go, "Don't be an idiot." Don't be an idiot. But
yeah, that's a currently accepted paradigm. It was a mistake, and so he finished it off in case he died early. But he went on and built, the Red Pyramid, which was the first true pyramid. Well, I don't accept that argument at all, because he already had a pyramid built at Meidum if he died early, so he could have stripped that pyramid down, knowing, that he already had a burial place ready, stripped it down, re-quarried it and built. But no, he finished it. He put casing stone all the way to the top. No, that's not something gone wrong. That's there's some other reason for that bend. I've read some theories. I don't have a particular theory on that myself, but it really is a real enigma, that one. It really is.
For sure. Scott, we're out of time. Been fascinating chatting to you today. The book is called The Secret Chamber of Osiris, Lost Knowledge of the 16 Pyramids. Well done, Scott. Great book, well presented, and great knowledge inside. Of course, we're going to see you for a Capricorn TV interview next month, and we'll talk more on Egypt and many other mysteries, Scott. But I really thank you for your time today for Capricorn Radio.
Thanks, James. It was really good talking to you this afternoon. Thank you. Back then was, if you can't beat it, join it. So sure. I did a lot of courses in new technology, IT courses, got my HND, did some computer networking courses, been qualified as a computer network engineer for many, many years now. And that's basically, after that, I joined the local economic development agency here in Glasgow, who basically have offices all over the world. And in that job, I was responsible for all the offices overseas, which was really good, because it sent me to far-flung places like Tokyo and Beijing, Taipei, Seoul, basically all over the world, North America, Europe, to see a lot, particularly the Far East, a lot of the ancient sacred sites in the Far East. So it was a great experience. As I said, my job basically allowed me to do that, which was a great privilege. So that's basically myself in a nutshell.
Sure.
You asked about Osiris.
Let's get into just a little bit on the background of Osiris for those not familiar, and why the secret chamber of Osiris.
Right, okay. Well, Osiris was, or came to be, the most important god in ancient Egyptian religion. Ancient Egyptians had many, many gods, but Osiris eventually usurped most of the gods in ancient Egypt to become their most important god. He was a god of rebirth and regeneration. And there's a myth
This is your host James, and got a returning guest today. Really delighted to have Scott Crichton back. He's an engineer, extensively travelled, and this has allowed him to explore many of the world's ancient sacred sites. He's the host of the Alternative Egyptology Forum on AboveTopSecret.com. He's the co-author of the Giza Prophecy, and he lives in Glasgow, Scotland. Sunny Glasgow, as we said last time, and we've got a fascinating book to talk about today, The Secret Chamber of Osiris, Lost Knowledge of the 16 Pyramids. Fascinating book. Also has a foreword by Rand Flemath, who was on last week, and Rand does a wonderful introduction into the book as well. Let me just tell you a bit of the book. After 200 years of pyramids as tomb theory, a growing body of evidence suggests that the first 16 pyramids of ancient Egypt were not only royal tombs but nearly indestructible recovery vaults designed to revive civilization after an anticipated major catastrophe, the Deluge of Thoth. Scott examines the prophecy of catastrophe and the ancient Egyptians' massive undertaking to ensure the survival of their civilization. He also explains how the pyramids acted as easily located storehouses for seeds, tools, and civilizing knowledge. And they would be able to visible to house the precious treasures necessary to restore the rich culture of ancient Egypt. For this, the ancients created a secret chamber whose existence was hidden in myth and whose location was encoded in the Giza pyramids. So without further ado, let's bring on today's guest. Hi Scott, welcome to Capricorn Radio.
Hello James, it's good to be here again.
Oh, back again Scott, I got you again for sure. Really looking forward to today's show, Scott. What a wonderful book, The Secret Chamber of Osiris. I guess the big one, to break down the title for people, Secret Chambers and Osiris. Let's tell people, first of all, Scott, a little bit about you, and then maybe just tell us a little bit about Osiris and why the book.
Right, okay. A little bit about myself. Well, I'm obviously from Glasgow. I've spent my life working in and around Glasgow. I started off my career. My passion has always been history ever since I was a child, really. Been fascinated particularly with the cultures of the Near East, particularly, obviously, ancient Egypt. My first job from leaving studies was actually in journalism. I was a junior reporter many lives ago for one of the local newspapers here in Glasgow. But that was way back in the very early 80s, and there was a lot of trouble and strife in the UK with the Thatcher government coming in, and lots of businesses were going to the wall back then, particularly in the newspaper industry with new technology, basically taking a lot of jobs away. So basically my view sort of figures that the myth tells us 16 pieces, 14 pieces or thereabouts, and scattered these pieces of Osiris across the land of Egypt. Now Isis, his wife, went in search of these pieces of Osiris in order to piece the body back together again. Now, she could find all the parts of the body except one part of the body, which was the phallus of Osiris. That essentially is the myth of Osiris. Now, I got to thinking, well, what does that actually mean? Because obviously, a lot of the time you hear that there's a lot of truth that can, be embedded within mythological legends that come down to us, and that basically was my thinking. Well, what could this actually be? And I started to read. This was a number of years ago. I started to read the pyramid texts. Now, the pyramid texts are the most ancient religious writings that we have in humankind's history. They're our oldest religious texts, and they're ancient Egyptian texts, obviously. These texts were written in a number of pyramids from the 5th dynasty. That's from about 2200 BC, from round about that time. They're found in about 4 or 5 different pyramids from that period onwards, 5th, 6th dynasty. And the pyramid texts written by Plutarch thousands of years ago about Osiris and his wife Isis, who also happened to be his sister. That's how the ancient Egyptians kind of did things. Mm-hmm. Anyway, in Plutarch's myth of Osiris and Isis, Osiris's brother Seth, or Set, was jealous of Osiris, who was essentially the ruler, and he set a trap, a plan to, take over, or to take Osiris's crown, Osiris's throne, and he basically set a trap for Osiris, and he created a box, and asked everyone to fit into this box to see, who fitted into this box, better than anyone else. So Osiris went into the box, and of course, as soon as he's in the box, his brother Seth, with some accomplices, fastened the box with the lid and secured it, and threw the box into the Nile, where basically Osiris essentially drowned.
Mm-hmm.
His wife went looking for the body, and eventually the body was found in, I think it was an acacia tree, and hearing this, Seth basically found Osiris and cut his body into 16 pieces. Or some parts of the myth say 14 pieces, some say slightly more, but these are the main